Younger pupils are thought to be around 3 months behind where they should be in their reading skills because of the pandemic. A report's found little progress has been made in closing the attainment gap for Year 1 pupils since the spring, despite schools being fully open. The Education Endowment Foundation says support needs to be targeted at disadvantaged pupils worst affected by school closures. Well, Courtney is the Joint General Secretary of the National Education Union and joins me now. You're always welcome, Kevin. Good morning.
Morning, Lisa. Thanks for having us.
Pleasure. This news, though, it all sounds pretty disappointing, doesn't it? What's gone wrong?
Well, I mean, it's not a surprise, is it, that children fell behind during the period of school closures. I mean, teachers worked might and main to get online learning set up, but disadvantaged children, that was much harder. They didn't have broadband at home. And with the children we're talking about in this report, the Year 1 children, it was always going to be harder for them to do online learning when they're so little. So what we have to think about is how to get them reading. And that requires lots of reading in schools. I mean, what we'd like to see from government, though, is also a focus on the other activities that those children will have missed out on while in the period of school closures. So, you know, the extra activities that could be being put around schooling now for those children is something that government needs to look at, that Kevin Collins wanted, but the government has turned down so far.
I do notice, though, in more heartening news, the study suggested there was some education recovery when it came to maths.
I mean, that's interesting, and schools are working on the basics with these children. So they are working on reading and they're working on maths. And the way that children of different ages respond to these things is always fascinating to teachers who want to talk about it all the time. What we have to do, I think, is not portray these children as having fallen behind in a way that means that we have to somehow catch them up. What we have to do is allow them to recover the missed ground, not make it a big deficit where we have to, have them extra hours of doing literacy after school. That wouldn't be the right approach. It's to encourage. It's to say, yes, there's a gap, but now let's have lots more reading books in schools. Let's have lots more opportunities to read. Let's have that as the focus in our school system. I mean, so teachers are wanting to engage with this. They need backing from the government. They need resources from government to help with all those measures.
And when we talk about disadvantaged pupils needing this extra help, Kevin, are we also talking about areas of the country across England, geographical issues?
There are geographical and there are social class issues in there. So we, the National Education Union, we've asked for, got freedom of information requests into government about the patterns of school closures and the absence rates from schools. And what you find is in the more blue-collar working class areas, there was more school absence due to COVID. And that's because the parents of those children could not work from home. They were out at work. They were more exposed to COVID. They were living in more crowded accommodation when they got home. And so COVID spread rather faster in those disadvantaged communities. So those children have both missed more in-person learning because they've had time off school. And they've also been in a place where they haven't always had a bedroom to learn in, their own dedicated laptop, etc. So there are all those things coming together, and that does require a real focus, just from any point of view of the talent in our country and the rights of young people to have the best possible life. But also, if you think about these big, highfalutin ideas like levelling up, if we aren't going to deal with there's problems that these kids in disadvantage have seen, that we can't possibly be thinking that we're levelling up.
Also, seeing as you're with me, Kevin, I would appreciate a comment on our top story, of course. One of our top stories. I mean, since we last spoke, the new Omicron COVID variant has now raised its head. So what are teachers perhaps telling you about viewing that in the classroom? You know, potential looming problems, isolation, pingdemic. Is mask wearing enough?
Well, we think the mask wearing that we're pleased the government has made a move. So it's now mask wearing for all adults in schools outside the classroom in communal areas. And it's mask wearing for year 7 and above, so secondary age children in communal areas. We think the government in England covering English schools, should go further and match what they're doing in Wales and in Scotland, where there is also mask wearing in secondary classrooms. And we think that because we think it would reduce the level of disruption to education. If we stop the virus spreading, we know that at the moment, COVID cases are highest amongst school-aged children. That's not because schools are uniquely COVID-y sorts of places. It's because children are uniquely unvaccinated, compared with other ages. So cases are highest and growing in schools, not growing fast at the moment, but still growing. And they are leading to 200,000 children a day being off school. And so we think that some more mitigations would reduce the number of children that are off school. We're looking at the data in Scotland and seeing less children off school in Scotland because of the mask wearing, because they say if your brother or sister tests positive, you have to stay at home for 3 days, get a PCR and only go back if that PCR is negative. That's what they do in Scotland, a slightly different regime in England. We think the government in Westminster should match what the Scottish government is doing. Teachers, looking at the Omicron variant, we are so pleased, teachers are so pleased to be back in classes with their children. Like I said, they work really hard to get the online learning set up, but it is not anything like as good as being with your class in person. And so we are really hoping that this doesn't lead to any more lockdowns. And so measures to stop the virus spreading are really important, we think, and government should be looking at them and backing teachers up in putting those in place.
All right, Kevin, really good to speak with you as always. Thank you for joining us live here on LBC News. Kevin Courtney there, Joint General Secretary of the National Education Union.